Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Jeff's Baking Blog. Today I'm making London cheesecake. Now, this is not a cheesecake in the sense that people understand a cheesecake to be these days. In fact, it has no cream cheese, no cheese whatsoever in it. It's a pastry I remember from my childhood, which is puff pastry with a little blob of jam on, and the jam is covered with a sort of frangipane sponge, an almond sponge really, just a little bit, and that's baked in the oven, and then the whole thing is topped with some icing sugar, and then it used to have long threads of coconut on, which is no longer available to buy for us, although Greg's the Baker's seems to get hold of it. So I'm going to use shredded coconut, but you could use desiccated coconut. So as I say, this is something I remember from my childhood, and they're very, very tasty. Greg's the Bakers do sell them, and I think probably in London they're sold more readily throughout the city. Now, when I was a child, these were simply known as cheesecake, but with the advent of what everybody now calls cheesecake, those big cream cheese confections, that confused the issue, so these are now called London cheesecakes. So it's actually quite a simple recipe, and I'm going to use shop bought all butter puff pastry. I would have made my own, but it's far too warm today to be making puff pastry, so I've got the shop bought stuff, and I'm just going to use one sheet. I've seen some recipes where they layer two sheets together, and I don't think for the purposes of this that's necessary at all. In fact, it probably makes the pastry rise too high. So I'll go on to the ingredients, and I have one sheet of all butter puff pastry, and I'm aware that the sheets come in different sizes, so I'm using this size, and the recipe that I've got here will be more than enough to do what I'm doing with this one single sheet. If you have a larger sheet, it might still be enough, but you can adjust it as necessary. Then I'm going to use half a teaspoon of raspberry jam on each of the shapes that I cut out. So that will be up to 3 tablespoons, I would think, maybe 4 tablespoons. And then for the cake, I have 70 grams of flour, which is half a cup minus 1 teaspoon. That's based on scooping packed flour into a 250 milliliter cup. I have 70 grams of caster sugar, which is 6 tablespoons minus 1 teaspoon. I have 30 grams, a third of a cup of ground almonds. I have 70 grams, 5 tablespoons of softened unsalted butter. I have 1 medium egg, which would be large in the USA, a teaspoon of almond extract, and a teaspoon of baking powder. And then for the icing, I have about 2.5 tablespoons, 37 milliliters of water, something like that, but we may not need all of it, and 200 grams of icing sugar, which is 1 2/3 cups. And then to go on the top of that, I have 50 grams of my shredded coconut. As I said, you could use desiccated. So the first thing to do is to preheat the oven, and I'm going to preheat my oven to 180 Celsius, that's 160 Celsius with a fan, 350 Fahrenheit, and I'm going to line a baking tray with some parchment paper. And then we'll make the cake batter. And I'm doing this with my hand mixer, but you could do it all by hand, it's very easy. I'm going to put the butter, the sugar and the almond extract into a bowl. I'm simply going to cream those together. And with those creamed together, I'm going to slowly add in my egg mixture, whisking all the time. And then I'm going to put the baking powder into the flour, and I'm going to mix that around. And I'm going to sprinkle that over the top, and then I'm going to put the almonds on top of that, and I'm simply going to mix that on a low speed until it's all come together. And that's good enough like that, and I will scrape that bowl down in a moment. So with the cake batter made, I'm going to put that to one side and get my puff pastry. And this has been out of the fridge for 10 minutes now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this into 4 strips, and then divide those strips into pieces as well. And you can make these whatever size you want, really. So I've divided that into 12 pieces fairly roughly, and what I'm going to do is, with a teaspoon, I'm just going to make a little dent in the centre of each one. And then I'm going to put no more than half a teaspoon of jam into that little dent. It doesn't need to be very much jam. And then I'm going to cut the paper to cut each piece separately onto its own piece of parchment. So having cut them into pieces, what I need to do now is take some of the cake mixture and put it on the pastry, completely enclosing the jam so that the jam doesn't leak out. You can pipe this, but I think I can do it without piping. And with 2 trays filled with the pastries topped with the jam and the cake, I'm going to put those into the oven, and I'm going to bake them for between 20 and 25 minutes until the puff pastry rises up and the cake is cooked on top. If the cake seems to be browning too much, I will quickly slip some aluminium foil on the top to stop them from browning until the pastry has cooked through. Then I'll take them out of the oven and allow them to cool down, and I'll come back after that and we'll put the icing on and the coconut. So I baked the pastries for 25 minutes, and the cakes rose up and then they sank down, and the pastry baked quite nicely, as you can see, and I think it's not flaky at the edge because I cut it with a knife. If I'd have cut straight down, it would have been flaky at the edge, but it's fine like that. So the next thing to do is to make the icing, and for the icing I'm going to pour about 2 tablespoons of the water into my icing sugar, and I'll mix it around. Now at the moment I do not want this to be runny at all. I want it just about to drip off the spoon, because what I want to try to do is frame the edges of the pastries with some icing that I can then fill in with the remainder of the icing, so that it doesn't run all over the edges. And as I need to, I'll add a little bit more water. So that's falling off the spoon just like that. It's still fairly thick. It will run if I put too much on, so I'm going to take one of the pastries and I'm going to try to drip just enough round the edge to form a frame. Like that, and then I'm going to fill it in. And that's good like that. So then I'm going to take some of the coconut and I'm going to sprinkle it on the top. Just like that. And gently press it down so that it sticks into the icing as much as it can. And I will do the same with the rest of them, and then once I've done them and I've left them to set just for a little bit, I'll come back and we'll have a taste. So I iced the London cheesecakes, put the coconut on top, and I've left them to set up just a little bit. So they actually look quite good, and I'll have a taste of one. It's going to be quite crumbly. Got the lovely buttery flaky puff pastry and the sweetness of the icing and the coconut, and then as you bite in you get some of that cake as well as just a little bit of raspberry jam. Very, very good indeed, just as I remember them. But this is very simple to make if you have the inclination. So that's going to be it for today. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give me the thumbs up below and click to subscribe to my YouTube channel. In the top right hand corner of the screen there will be an eye that you can click on, and that will take you to a link for this recipe, and I'll put a link below the video as well. And I'll be back with another recipe in the very near future. So until then, happy baking.